Thank you very much, Yoni. I feel that the promise for excitement has been largely fulfilled, if not least for these horrific beasts. We have some time for questions. Please use the microphone.
Thank you. It was really fascinating, all three papers. I wanted to ask Esther, I don't know where she is. Oh, yeah. A question about this secular religious aspect of French schools, because in French colonies, since 1905, all education was secular because of the separation between state and religion in France. And I wondered if there was any, in the mandate, was there any kind of struggle or effort of the French government to fight also against French religious schools and not only against British schools? Was there any kind of, was there an issue? Were they trying to kind of, overcome them or get students to come to them instead of religious schools?
Thank you for the question. French politicians, when thinking about the mandates and maybe the colonies also in general, also made a difference between what was happening in France and what was happening especially in Lebanon, because they had this important clientele of Maronites supporting them. They knew that they couldn't really separate state and schools, and so they continued to support religious schools financially, ideologically. Jesuits had free entrance to the mandate authorities in Paris and in Beirut, so they had a very close relationship. And only in the 1920s, when they realized that they couldn't continue like they did and had to also really open their schools, their institutions, their thoughts to non-Maronites, they also invested more. For example, when the Popular Front was successful in France, they invested more into the secular schools, also with money, with personnel. They visited these schools, so things changed. But at least for the beginning of the mandate, the religious this link with the French Catholics remained very important.
Sheila.
Thank you for these fascinating lectures. I have a question to whoever of the three panelists who would like to answer. I was wondering, were there any attempts by either teachers or students who critiqued the standardized testing and European education more broadly to provincialize, or what we may call today provincialize, these testings? I mean, not only question its local applicability, but also question its very universality.
So yes, that's the thing, right? Like the sort of progressive educators that Yoni discusses, sort of were really active, basically saying these, and it's very particularly people trained in the U.S. Who are sort of like, these tests are just leading to rote memorization. They're irrelevant to the lives of their students. You're not teaching the whole child. You're just filling them full of irrelevant facts. But one of my arguments, though, is that this ignores the very practical benefits of passing the test, right? It's something, and you actually, so I saw this more in education, like in the 1950s, when you have sort of more like modernization theory and this idea of sort of fitting students to a very specific economic role. And so like with Palestinian education with UNRWA, there was this thing where they would be like, okay, so we're gonna do American progressive education and they're gonna learn handicrafts. And these Palestinians are like, why would I learn handicrafts? I need a job. I don't have immovable property anymore. I can get a BA and go work and make money, right? So it's something where one of the funny things, right, is that actually the like less practical education is more practical. And that said, you did have, you know, sort of students saying, right, like I spent all of my time studying, you know, and again, like especially if they don't pass, right, like, or one of the people I talked about in my book is someone where they ended up having a vision problem and they weren't able to pass exams, and then their whole family just rejected the system of education itself and went and worked actually in like Islamic schools because they found an opportunity. But it is something where like this is always contested, but at a certain point it kind of like becomes like inexorable. Like again, if there weren't tangible benefits, people really wouldn't do it.
I think it's very similar to what you said yesterday about temporality and enjoying the wealth of oil that never comes. So progressive education and its ideas were known to everyone, and they taught them, and they knew that the child should be the center, and they knew that examinations don't examine what the person is, right? We are not a grade, we are not a number. And they had this idea of liberating the mind, but first, we need to do the exams. But first, let's see how much you're worth. So this is the engine behind the system, like the economic world that you discussed yesterday. And I think that this temporality and this anticipation is known to us also, right, in the academic system in high school. But I think the difference is, and I said this in the United States, it took a century until progressive education entered and tried to change or challenge this standardization and change some of the practices in classrooms. In the Middle East, it was much more apparent. Standardization, doing everything comme il faut, like it should be, and it was also liberating, and it was also a path to mobility, but it was also very rigid until today. And I think, I mean, going to class, I think, the ending of Tawjihi, you see here, right? What happens in Jerusalem and other, I mean, the results of exams and how important it is, and grades and so on. So, yeah, they wrote about it, they knew the other reality, but they lost. The beasts won in another.
Okay, Billie, please.
I think that Jordan was first. Are you sure? Yeah, thanks very much for all of this. I learned a lot. I have a couple of questions addressed to Hilary and to Yoni. The first concerns standardization, which implies some kind of universalizing, especially when the idea comes from Europeans and they mean going by the European civilized standard. Now, my question is this. In all of the League of Nations institutions and in various sort of off-the-branch educational institutions, you see standardization writ large. They want to, if you look at protocols or the publications of the ICIC, the International Commission for Intellectual Cooperation, you see zillions of pages dedicated to the idea of standardizing the vocabulary, the questions, the textbooks, and the examinations of sciences, from chemistry to mathematics, and of the humanities. There are summer camps devoted to the idea, and interestingly, a lot of it is directed against nationalism. Nationalism, European style, which eventually, in these people's view, brought up the First World War. So do locals debating standardization address this problem because it could be looked at both ways. And how did British educational administrators react? My second question is in regard progressive education. You mentioned mainly Dewey, and rightly so, because this is the background of your three educators. But progressive education was a byword in many parts of Europe. For example, in Spain, particularly when ultra-Catholic church education became rampant. So progressive education could be child-centered and revolve around the child, but it could also be very pragmatic. That is, we will teach you carpentry and being a good gardener rather than the classics in any language. So how did it work? And what class was addressed? And I'm sorry about this, but what about gender? Was it brought up at all? And I'm sorry I spoke too long.
Just a second. These are extremely heavy and interesting questions. We are already into the time of our break. So maybe we should discuss them in the break. We are breaking here, meeting again in half an hour. Thank you.